I have a special request in from Cracker that we finish by 9 o'clock so he can see Love Island continues. We will definitely deliver on that. We will not be here at 9 o'clock. We'll see how long it takes. The purpose of the sort of 3 sessions we were going to have was to help people who are on a journey from the level they're at to getting to an advanced level, which would probably be a single figure PR 8 or 9 probably. So for people on a journey from 12 or 13 to 8 or 9, we're going to do 3 tips tonight and probably 3 every night or at every session. And in general, you'll be able, the hope is that you'll be able to put the tip into your game. If you can put it into your game will always be stronger because you won't have to think about it anymore. It will simply be in your game. This is going to be interactive. And so after each tip, certainly I'll stop. And also during some of the tips, I'll stop just to have a chat. So the 3 tips we're going to cover this evening are, first one is the tough one, counting the race. And the next 2 are pretty straightforward. How to bring in your checkers to your home board, which a lot of people don't do properly. And the third one, you might think is the easiest one of all. It's how to take off your checkers. And most people know this, but again, I was watching an Irish game 2 nights ago and people were getting it wrong. So you might think it's very easy. And once you know the answer, it is very easy. So there are the 3 areas we're going to cover tonight. Counting the race might be about 20 minutes. Bearing in your checkers, 5 to 10. Bearing off your checkers, 5 to 10. So hopefully there's nothing too difficult there. Okay, counting the race. It's very important that you know how you stand in the race. That's for 2 reasons. One, it will influence how you play your checkers. So if you're behind by 10 pips, don't run. You should look for contact. So you must know where you are in the race to make that decision. And the second reason is you'll also want to know, should you be doubling your opponent or should you take, particularly if you're in a race where the contact is over. Now, counting the race, most people, so that's okay, most people find it quite difficult. I think it's got a lot harder for 2 reasons. One is because we're all playing online, so we don't have to count the race. It's given to us. So I think when we go back to playing over the board, we're going to find it a bit tougher. And the second reason is very often nowadays, in big tournaments, you'll play with a clock. And most people can't count the race quickly. So you need to know, I think if you want to play at an advanced level, you have to say to yourself, I must figure out a way of counting the race. Once you figured out a way, if it works for you, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is share a method which I think is makes the work of counting the race, it about halves it, makes it half the normal counting you have to do. And I think it's more accurate. So here's a position. Pretty straightforward position. We're bearing off to the right. We're taking our checkers off on the right. So white contact is pretty much gone. White's pip count is 100 pips. And he's thinking of doubling. So does anyone know how far white should be ahead to double? So white's 100.
10.
Okay. White is 100. And to double, any other estimates?
8%.
We had 11 and 10.
8.
8. We got there in the end.
8 is correct.
8 is correct. We need to be 8% ahead. So we need to be 8 pips ahead. Now, you've got to know that. So there won't be too many figures in this presentation, but you do need to know that one. So if you're 100 pips and your opponent is 108 or more, you can double. And you have to double when you're 8 ahead. You can't wait to get to be 10 ahead. You must double if you're 8 ahead. Okay? So does anyone know, so if white is winning the race, how close does black need to be to take? So if white is 100, what's the most that black can be to take?
107.
Sorry?
107.
12.
108.
112.
Yeah, so you double when you are 8 pips or more ahead, and you take if you're 12 or less. So you've got to, so this is, so you've got to know that. Okay, so you double once you're 8 or more, and you can just take at 12. So they're percentages. So if you have to adjust those a little bit. So if you're 130 ahead, 8% of 130 is not going to be 8 pips. It's going to be 10 pips. So if the race is much longer, you still need that percentage lead. So in the case of where you are 100 pips, let's say if you're 100 pips, you can double if your opponent is 108. That's an 8-point difference. If you're 130 pips, you can double if your opponent is 140. Yeah. Yeah, this is really where contact is over. This is the race. It's just a race. And it's also assuming the score is 0-0. You know, this isn't where one is 2 away and one is 5 away and stuff. This is 0-0 to 11. So, and I'm sure we could put these slides up, guys, just to say on the website or whatever. But you've got to know that. You know, so we're now about to count the race to try to figure out, are we that much ahead? But with that information, we apply it by using that. So if we're 100 pips and our opponent is 109, we're going to double. If we're 112 pips and we're doubled and he's 100, we're going to take. If we're 114 and he doubles and we're 100 pips, we're going to drop. Okay? Is that clear enough? Now, their percentages, you know, it'll take a little bit to apply them, but are people comfortable enough that they at least understand what those numbers say?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then we come to the hard work of actually trying to count the race. So here's a typical example of what happens when I play Cracker over the board. Cracker gets a racing advantage and says, hold on, please, I need to count this. He counts up his own pips, 237, looks at me and says, that can't be right. Because Cracker is a good player. He knows that when you start off, you only have 167. So he counts again and he gets 137. And he says, that's right. And then he starts counting my pips, 24, 48, 53, 57, 62, 71. He looks at me and says, oh gosh, I've forgotten what my own number is.
Hmm.
And then he will do one of three things. He will say, I'm going to count them again. He will double me, or he will, and each of those is equally likely. So that's quite common. Now, can you imagine if you had 2 minutes left on your clock in the finals in Monte Carlo? You want to, so it's really important to get this right. You've got to be able to count the race. Now, that's a hard way of counting the race. You count up your own pips, a lot of additions, and you're coming to a number which is like 120 or something. You keep that in your head, and then you start counting up your opponent's pips. There's a lot of counting going on here. But the number that you want is the difference. And there's a way of just going straight to counting the difference. And it's not to count your pips and count his pips. It's just to go in and count the difference. So we're going to do that now. And this is the first tip. You should count the difference rather than count both sets of checkers. So let's see how this works in practice. Here we go. White is, let me just, I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. Okay, so white is on roll, and white's wondering, do I have a double? And this is how you count the difference. You're taking your checkers off to the right. So on the 1 point, I have no checkers, and neither does my opponent. So the difference is nil. On the 2 point, I have no checkers, and neither does my opponent. So the total difference is nil. And now white, who is thinking of doubling, gets to the 3 point. And white says, oh dear, I've got more checkers than him. And so by the 3 point, white says, I am losing the race by 3. Now, can I just stop there?
Not that the wrong way around, surely.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan, because I want to stop. So white is thinking of doubling, and white has counted to the 1 point, the 2 point, and the 3 point. And having counted the 3 point, white says, I am losing the race by 3. Do people agree that looking at 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point on both sides of the board, on the 2 sides of the board? So white is comparing his checkers on the 1 point to black's on the 1 point, and there are no checkers on either side. Similarly, white's 2 point and black compares his 2 point. There are no checkers, so the difference is nil. But when you compare the 3 points, white has an extra checker. So just looking at the 1 point and 2 point and 3 point, can people see that white is losing the race by 3?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that okay, guys? Is anyone got a problem saying, I don't really see it and I'll do it again?
No, I say that.
Okay. So white says, I've done the 1 point, the 2 point, and the 3 point, and I'm losing the race by 3. I do the 4 point. That's easy, because there's no difference. So I'm still losing the race by 3. And white now looks at the 5 point and the 6 point. He's got 1 on the 5 extra and 1 on the 6 extra. That adds up to 11. Add that to the 3, and that's 14. So having counted half of the board, white says, I'm losing by 14. Are people comfortable? That's the right-hand side of the board. Are people comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay. So white's done half the job of counting the difference. He goes to the 7 point and says, there's no difference on our 7 points. He then gets to the 8 point and says, oh, good. Black has 2 checkers there and I've none. So I'm gaining 16. I was losing the race by 14. So now I'm winning the race by 2. And then he looks at the 9 point, no one has anything there, looks at the 10 point, and again, black has an extra checker, and white says, oh, that's excellent. I'm now winning the race by 12. And white can see that he can stop counting now because the other 3 checkers balance each other out. So in fact, without adding up his own checkers and without adding up his opponent's checkers, white now knows the most important number. I'm winning the race by 12. Now, all white needs to know now is to get an approximate value of his own checkers. He doesn't need an exact value. The figure that you need to be exact on is the difference. The reason for that is that if you know that you're 10 pips, in this case, you're 12 pips ahead. If you're 12 pips ahead on 100, you're 12% ahead. You have a double. And if you're 12 pips ahead on 120, you're 10% ahead. You have a double. And, you know, the number underneath the 12 is the key thing. It's the difference. You just need to get approximately right. So I'll show you how I would do white's checkers approximately. This is the way I would do it. I figured out I'm 12 ahead. I'd look at the 3 on the 13 point. 3 13s are 39. I'll call it 40. 2 on the 7 is 14. That's 54. 1 on the 6 is 60. And 2 more makes me 72. 2 on the 5 is 82. And 1 more is 87. 87 and 8 is 95, 95 and 6 is 101. It doesn't matter if it's 102, 103, 98, 99, 97. Once I'm broadly right, because 12 is big enough to double. We only need 8% on 100. We're about 100. We've got loads, we've got plenty, so white can double. So I'm just going to move on and show some tricks, and then we're going to do one more count. If you practice this for about 10 minutes every day for 2 weeks, you'll have it. You've got to invest that effort. If you don't practice it, you won't get it. But here are some tips to help when you practice. If I saw that on the board, I would automatically go, no difference. Because the symmetry of the white pieces allows me to push 2 to the right and 2 to the left, and they'll end up where the black ones are. And if I'm giving myself 2 and taking away 2, clearly I haven't done anything to myself. So if you look at symmetry, you'll know that there's no difference between those 2 totals. Okay? So can people see that symmetry would mean they're the same? So if you had 3 checkers on the 3 point and 3 on the 5 point, and black had 6 checkers on the 4 point, well, they're the same. You know that symmetry, you can use symmetry by pushing checkers together. Here's another one, which I think you'll find a little more obvious. Here, I would just look at that and I would go, black is 4 behind. And the reason is that if you pushed the black checkers all forward by 1 pip, they would end up where the white checkers are. So if you had to move each black checker closer to home by 1, well, that must be a 4 pip difference. Do people sort of see that that's a 4 pip difference? Is that sensible?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So what you're doing there actually is you're mentally shifting the checkers. And when you have to push the block of 4 by 1 pip, well, that's 4 ones. Okay. And here's the last trick, which is very helpful. It looks tricky, but it's not. If you have 2 checkers that are opposite each other, so they always add to 25. And let's just check that out. The 1 point and the 24 point, but that adds to 25, 1 and 24. The 5 point and the 20 point, well, that's 25. And the 13 and the 12, that's 25. So 2 checkers opposite each other is always 25, wherever they are. And for that reason, 4 checkers opposite each other is 50. So if 2 opposite each other is 25, well, then 4 is 50. Now, those 3 tips are just useful things to count. Symmetry means that's no difference, they're the same. Mentally shifting the checkers says that difference is 4. So just by looking at it, I go 4. And using that 25 is very useful. So we're just going to finish this off, and we can have then just a quick chat on it by doing a count. So in this particular situation, let me just adjust my, oh, I've lost my, here's my cursor. Okay. In this situation, black has doubled me. I've got a minute left on my clock. It's the last game. It's an important, or say it's 3 away, 3 away. It's important I get this right. It's a complicated enough looking position. Black's ahead, but how much? So here I go. From the right, no difference, no difference. I'm losing by 3. 4 point. I'm losing by 7. I'm losing by 7, 5 point, 6 point. I've done them all. That's fine. I've done the right-hand side of the board and I'm losing by 7. Just to help myself, I'm going to jump over to the left and count that 50. Now I'm losing by 57. And now I'm going to count the checkers on the 7, 8, and 9. I'm losing by 57 before that. So now he has 3 on the 7. I'm losing by 57. I'll knock one of them off and I'm losing by 50. Now I'll knock the other 2 off, which is 14, and I'm losing by 36. I get to the 8 point. He has 2 extra. I'm losing by 36. 36 less 16 is 20. He's got 9 point. Now I'm losing by 11. I'm finished the count. I'm losing by 11. So I need to remember that number. Legs 11, I've got 11, good. Now I need to know what's his pip count. So 2 4s are 8, 18, 18 and 24 is 42, 42 and 21 is 63, 63 and 24 is 87, 87 and 9 is 97, it's about 100. I'm losing by legs 11, I have a take. It's 11 over 100 within 12%. So I'm going to say that took me, I don't know what it took me. I had to talk while doing it, but I'm going to say, look, I had the guts of it in 30 seconds or something like that. That was a count and a double decision, you counting both sides, getting a vague idea of the checkers for the percentage difference and making my decision. So maybe we'll just pause, because that is the first tip. That's the hard one, guys. That's the hard one for tonight. Can a few people tell us, how do they count the race? Can anyone, does anyone count? Does anyone count the race? Or you know,
Yeah.
Oh, we do count the race, yeah.
how do you count the race?
First of all, I check I would drop in that position, practically. I wouldn't take it, even it's 13%, as you're saying, but it's dropped to me.
Okay,
And
it's about
I think if you
11%.
take it,
so
you lost that game.
Yeah, it's 11%, so you take 12%.
Because
Yeah,
of the crossovers, though.
What about the
Does
extra
anybody-
crossover, Sean?
No, crossovers, if you want to be advanced, you have to count. Crossovers is an approximate way of counting. So I think there are 3 ways of doing things. Don't count, count crossovers, and count. I think if you want to play at 7 or 8, you have to count. Crossovers is better than not counting at all, but it's not good enough. So I think I showed you a way that, you know, in fairness, if you want to be an advanced golfer, you've got to actually do a bit of work. This is one, it's a race. So counting is crucial to the race. So I think if you're sort of saying, I want to play at 7 or 8, then you've got to count. I think you've got to take the work on yourself and say, well, crossovers is better than not counting, but it's not good enough to play at 7 or 8. So, I mean, that might sound a bit harsh, but I think you got to count.
That's quite a good example because the crossovers are the same on that, and yet you're 11. So it can be, crossovers can be deceiving.
Yeah, crossovers can be very deceiving.
The other thing I would say is contact is over and you've counted the race, keep a running tally, and then you won't have to count it again.
That's true, Rich.
You know, so it's just like I'm up 11, I'm down 8.
For sure. I think this tip is a little bit hard, and it's the hardest one I'll do in the session. But because, you know, when you play online, it pops up, you don't have to do any work. But when you go back to playing over the board, and particularly like if you're playing in the finals of something, there's a very good chance it's on the clock. You know, guys, if you can't count accurately and quickly, you're starting off with one arm tied behind your back. So look, that's just as what I'm saying is counting the difference. You can see what I did. It's not that hard. Brendan would count the difference, Mike Lockman. You see any of the guys over the board in Monte Carlo, and when they're looking at it, they're counting. And most will be using a difference method.
There's a YouTube video in counting the difference. It was done by Mark Olson.
Fantastic, thank you. I think what everybody might do is just practice it a little bit, and it's so powerful. You get good at it and you invent your own little tricks as well. But because I think it's very, very hard to add up your pips, keep it in your head, add up his pips, subtract it, do a percent. It's just a lot of work. The difference is much quicker. Guys, if it's okay, that was the hard tip. We'll move on to the easier ones.
Another good idea is to use your opponent's clock. Like if he's sitting counting the race, you don't just sit there doing nothing. You may as well count the race and use his clock.
That's a very good tip, Rich. If he's counting the race and his clock is running, you should be counting the race too. He's thinking of doubling you. You should know the answer by the time he's finished.
Yes, yeah, that's a good tip. That's actually a very good tip, yeah.
I have a little trick, Sean, for counting a 5 prime. There's a 5 prime there from 17 to 20, sorry, from 4 to 8 inclusive.
Yeah, I would cracker. Yeah.
Two
So
pieces
you
on
take
each
the
of
two
those. It's 10 times the middle one. So it's 60.
Yeah. You can use symmetry, as Cracker has done there, that the 2 checkers on black's 4 point, 5 point, 6 point, 7 point, and 8 point. Using symmetry, you can pretend that all of those checkers are on the 6 point, because you've 2 on the 6 and you've 4 on either side. So that's the same as the 10 of them being on the 6, and that's where Cracker gets 60. Okay.
Sean, may I ask a question that will reveal my ignorance and also the fact that I've never played a live competition before? Are you allowed to have a pen and paper with you as you play a game, or is it not allowed, or is it just looks stupid?
You're not allowed, but what you're allowed to do is use your fingers. Okay. So, for instance, when you get to difference being 11, you can put 2 fingers on the table and now count up where you want a percentage. You are allowed to use your fingers, but you're not allowed to use pen and paper.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question about?
Certainly can.
Yeah, about the speed. Do you have any tips?
Kieran, can you speak up a tiny bit, is it, please?
Do you have any tips about how to use the clock well?
Most people are intimidated by the clock and move too quickly. So I think the tip then is don't be intimidated, take your time. Generally you have 8 or 10 seconds, so don't stop thinking, you know, and that it probably plays in a little bit to the next 2 tips, Tiernan. It's important to find bits of the game where you don't have to think, because there will be times in the game where you do have to think. I think you should certainly be spending time on the clock to assess, take decisions and double decisions. They're the most important. But also, you know, recognize that you must find times in the game where you don't have to think. So if you roll a 3-1 at the start, I don't think many of us are thinking, which is good. So I'm going to give you 2 more times when you don't have to think. And I think someone should probably go on mute. Everyone tries going on mute and disappear. Excellent. So this is called, yes, please. That's very fun. That's very fair. Because with the clock as well, you can decide to speed up if you're running low on time. Okay, guys, and I'm conscious.
Sean, can I just finish? There is a YouTube video on counting the difference in pips, which might help people, by Mark Olson. So it's on YouTube. So if you can't follow this video or want something else, other tips, go on there.
Thanks, Kevin.
YouTube, Mark Olson.
So Mark Olson, very good Norwegian guy who runs Galaxy OLSEN. So I think you'll find it. So counting the race, we're on a race to 9 o'clock in Love Island. This is how to bear your checkers in. In this position, which is symmetrical, so we know what the race is, no difference. What's important here when you're bringing in your checkers is not just to get them into your home board, and your home board is on the right. It's to get them into your home board in the right way. So often there will be times when you won't be bringing a checker into your home board, and then you'll have a choice of what to do. Or sometimes you'll have a choice of how to bring a checker into your home board. And once you see this, you have it. And very often this tells me, am I playing a good player or a weak player? How they bring their checkers into the home board tells me everything. If they do it wrong, then they're not a good player. So this is what you want to do when you're bringing your checkers into your home board as white. You want to end up with that. Now, in practice, you're not going to end up with that because the game has happened and lots of things have happened. But that's actually the shape you want. That is the most efficient shape for you to get your checkers in your home board. And what's very important about that position is that you've got lots of checkers on the 5 and on the 4 point. You're going to have checkers on the 6 point anyway, because you started with 5 on the 6. So you're generally going to have checkers. But the key thing with that position is you've lots of checkers on the 5 and 4. So I have a question for you. The pip count here is 65 pips for white and 65 pips for black. If white is on roll and big on roll is an advantage, how many games do you think white will win out of 100? So just some guesses. So white has an advantage anyway. White's on roll. It's 65 pips each. So just give us a few guesses. Played 100 times, how many will white win? Anyone just guess a few numbers?
55.
55?
60.
60?
I would 80. 80.
80?
Yeah.
70?
I would say 66.
66. Thank you. Okay, so so white's clearly winning most of them, which is on because he's on roll and it's level pips. So thank you for that. If black is on roll, how many games will black win?
20.
40.
I would say 34.
42.
Okay, so I think we can all feel distribution matters. So the actual numbers are white will win nearly 70%. And if black's on roll with the same pip count, black will win a little over 50%. It's a big advantage having the roll and it's equal pips. But the difference due to distribution is pretty huge. And so where's the weakness? The weakness is the gap on the 5 point. That's where, like, 5 is a very good number to throw. It's a big number, but for black, it's not. Black just keeps on having to go to the ace point. And if you think about it, if black rolls a 5 and he ends up with 3 or 4 checkers on the ace point, black will be taking those checkers off on the ace point with 4s and 5s again, probably. It's almost cost 10 when he rolls a 5. It's just ridiculous. So, and that's why when we're bearing in, we want to have this distribution with lots on the 5 and lots on the 4. So here's 2 examples of where bearing in, now that we know what we want, becomes much easier. So black has rolled 6-2, everyone's getting excited, and an awful lot of the time I see people just put the 2 on the 6 point. Because they see it. I can bring it in, and the 2 has gone to the 6 point before they even think. But because we know what we want, and we know our weakness, it's the 5 point, suddenly we play the far checker in, and we put it to the 5 point. And now we've got a much better distribution. It's half a blunder not to go to the 5 point. So you might think, bearing in, sure, that's ridiculous. That's really easy. Yeah, but you could make half a blunder here. But we shouldn't make that mistake anymore. Weakness. And here we got an opportunity to correct it. And that's why we come to the 5 point. Here's another example. White has rolled 6-1. Fairly horrible distribution. The 6 plays itself. It puts 4 points. That's a good help. It gives us 2 on the 4. And a lot of people just automatically play 8-7 because they want to be sure to get in. But that 1 isn't bringing in a checker anyway. So you use the 1, play 6-5. If you don't do that, I think that just about is what's classified as a blunder. I think someone else needs to go on mute. Sorry about that, guys. So you know the distribution now. You want lots of checkers on the 5 and 4 in particular. And in this example, you play 10 to 4 with the 6. You can't bring the 1 in anyway. So you use that time to correct your distribution and make it better. You don't get the ideal distribution we talked about, that's fine, but get checkers on your 5 and 4. So tip 2 is bear in to the high points and look for a good distribution of checkers on the 6, 5, and 4. If you do that, things will turn out better. Is that, guys, I'm conscious of time, so I think that one is fairly self-explanatory, but maybe just if there's a quick question or two, we'll have it. Excellent. Favorite sorts of questions. Tip 3 coming up. How to take off your checkers. You might think this is very obvious. I watched a game, I saw 2 of Ireland's finest going wrong. So, you know, here's the rule. It's just the rule. If you roll a 1 and you have a checker on the 1 point, take the checker off. If you roll a 2 and you have a checker on the 2 point, take it off. If you roll a 3, if you roll a 4, if you roll a 5, you always take the checker off. I'm going to show you a position now. And this is as bad a distribution as you could get for white. You've rolled a 4 and a 1. I've seen people here fiddling with checkers all over the place, doing everything. 6-2, 6-5, 6-2, 1 off, 6-5, 4 off, all sorts of things. The rule is you've rolled a 4, you've a checker on the 4, you take it off. You've rolled a 1, you've a checker on the 1, you take it off. It's a simple rule. I've seen lots of people go wrong. The great thing about it is when you know the rule, it can become part of your game that you don't have to think about, because you'll be using your mental energy for other times. Now, it's a little bit different if you can't get a checker off with one of the dice, but that you need to use the 2 dice. Sometimes if you need to use the 2 dice, you might balance extreme positions. White has rolled a 2-1. He doesn't have a checker on the 1. He doesn't have a checker on the 2. The right move by a long way is 6-5, 6-4. So in this case, white is a very extreme position and should use the low numbers to balance out. But it has to be very extreme, guys. Here's a slight alteration of the position. Now the checker should come off. So, you know, rather than have 4 on the 6, we have 3 on the 6 and 1 on the 5. So I think I'd probably be almost saying, just take the bloody checkers off. So back to that rule, when you roll 1 dice and there's a checker on that number, take it off. So 4 and a 1, the most, and I've seen good players fiddling around here, doing all sorts of things, and they're using up their mental energy because they didn't know the rule. So the rule is 4-1, take them off. So tip 3 is take off a checker with 1 die. And I'll just check in with you guys. Do people understand that? Once you understand it, it's part of your game and you have it. But is there a question on it? So, you know, if you roll a 4 and you have a checker on the 4, take it off. So I'll just pause to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we've got now a total of 3 tips. Counting the race, it's easier to count the difference. When you're bear in to get a good distribution on the 4, 5, and 6. Don't just get them into the 6 point. And particularly when you've got a small number like a 1 or a 2, it doesn't bring a checker into your home board. You can look to see, does that balance out? And the place you're balancing out is the 6, 5, and 4. And generally it's the 5 and the 4. And then take off a checker with 1 die. So they're all of the tips. I think there's probably something to be said if you're playing, you know, around 12 or 13, that it's good to read a book. I'd recommend McGreal's Backgammon. I think it's very nicely written. It's very simply written. It's not a hard read. I think there's probably a lot of copies of that knocking around Ireland. Maybe the Federation can set up some sort of library, or even if people would let the Federation know they've got the book and someone could borrow it. I had a copy of McGreal. It's somewhere out in the backgammon community. I don't want it back, but you know, there's lots of people who have a copy of it. I'd recommend it. $50 on eBay, I'm sure, but there's copies in Ireland. So that's my recommendation. There's lots of good books out there, but it's important to start with the right book. There's a lot of tough books out there, but they're a bit tough, you know. I'm working my way through Roberti's latest one on opening moves, and it's all the opening moves for the first couple of moves, and it's pretty tough going. You know, it's just tough going. I've learned some things, I certainly have, but I find it quite hard to absorb. You know, but I would recommend that. And finally, it's another question for you. And maybe it's the session we would do next week, which is when should you double? So this is a position where the race is level. They're both 110 pips. Contact is just about over, you know. Well, it's over for white, really, I guess you could say, but black has a bit of a hurdle to get over. So white's on roll, and a question for the audience: should white double? So the pip count is level. So, you know, so you wouldn't double if black didn't have his checker there with a level pips, you wouldn't be doubling when it's level. So black is doubling because he's on roll and has a shot. So would anyone double this? Would anyone not double it? Any views? It will certainly be a take. The question is it a double? So Danny, you're in the double camp. Anyone in the double camp? Anyone in the not yet camp?
I'm with Danny.
I am as a white to double and black to take.
Yeah, black will be taking everything here. Yeah, so we have some doubles.
Sean, what's the match score?
Nil, everything I look at is 0-0 to 11.
Right.
I'm in the not yet camp.
Okay.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Okay. Well, next week we can look at, the good news is, and we will explain this, if you said double, you are correct. And if you said not a double, you are correct. So we can explain that next week.
I know, Sean. I know, Sean, the answer. It's too good to be true.
The good news is this is such a good audience. I wanted to leave you with a question where everybody would be right. And it is correct on that. Doubling is correct and not doubling is correct too. And I will explain that next week. Now, 5 minutes to Love Island. Cracker, you're still in good shape. You'll be able to get your coffee. If there are some questions which you think of later, or you didn't want to ask with the audience or whatever, if you pop the questions to the email that said we were having a session tonight, look, we'll answer them today or tomorrow or the next day. Which I think I'm done, and I said I'd let people go within the hour. So
I've just one question, Sean. You said
Please.
you were studying Roberti's opening moves.
Yeah, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, but a book was out recently, Michi. Michi had a book out on opening moves and also endgame techniques. I thought you were studying his book.
No, I've read those two, and I would recommend them, but I'd recommend McGreal first. Michi's book is called Opening Concepts. So it's
McGreal or Roberti?
No, Michi's book is called Opening Concepts. So it's about ideas of opening. Roberti's latest one is the actual opening moves. It's not about the ideas. It looks at each of the opening moves for the first couple of rolls of a game. And it's pretty tough. I wouldn't recommend it. So there's lots of better books to read. So just to say that. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was
Great.